Good morning and welcome to the first 2026 edition of our Pure Leadership series. And hi, my name is Winston Thomas and I am the editor-in-chief for CDOTrends. It's an online publication that covers a range of issues, including security, data science, and AI, which we will cover today. So let's start. Not so long ago, we lived in an era where efficiency used to be the only metric that really mattered. But now, a single regulatory shift or a sudden geopolitical tremor can turn a global cloud strategy into a liability overnight. Hence, why we titled today's session Data Sovereignty Building Your Geopolitical Firewall Before You Need One. We are not just talking about where data sits anymore. We are actually talking about operational survival. So how do you choose providers that can't be switched off by a foreign government? How do you secure a digital supply chain that stays running when the world doesn't? It all matters when we are becoming more and more dependent on AI. To help us navigate this discussion, we have two pragmatists who live at the intersection of trust and technology. We have Matthew Oostvin, CTO for Asia Pacific and Japan at Pure Storage. Matt is a strategist who argues that the noise in our data is our biggest security flaw. He believes that to build a sovereign future, we have to integrate the hardware and software layers tightly so that we can build resilience to external pressure. Next, we have Karthik Uyala, Executive Director at Standard Chartered Bank. Karthik is solving one of the most interesting puzzles in finance, how to move fiduciary trust, a concept 100 years old, into a world of blockchain and tokenization. Through initiatives like HKMA's Project Ensemble, he is showing that you can move real-world assets into digital formats without losing compliance that keeps the global economy stable. Now, we are going to talk a lot about AI sovereignty, data sovereignty, and sovereign AI. Lots of definitions. And before we dive in, I'd like to align our terms. At CDOTrends, we do see a clear ladder of progression. Data sovereignty, the legal baseline, your data obeys the laws of the land where it lives. AI sovereignty, the legal control over the intelligence created from that data and who owns that model. And then we are also will be talking and touching on sovereign AI, which is actually the ultimate goal. This is your operational independence. It means having your physical infrastructure, talent, and proprietary models to run your entire business without being hostage to a black box or algorithm or a foreign provider, which, as you can imagine, is really difficult to get at. While these terms will be used interchangeably, I want you to be mindful on the progression from legal control to operational independence. Now, before we start, I would like to point out two things. One is that we want this discussion to be two-way. So we want your questions as well. So please pose those questions at the Q&A button right at the bottom. Use this as your channel so that we can take your questions and pose it to our panelists. And next, since this is all about data today, we would like to get some zero-party data from our audience itself. So we are now going to do a short audience poll. And the question we'll be asking is, how would you describe your organization's current approach to data sovereignty? Is it we have a clearly defined strategy? Maybe we have some policies, or in the process of defining one strategy, or relying on cloud and service providers to handle that part of data sovereignty. Or to be honest, some of you might not even have started. Let us know, and we will come back to the conclusions as we go into our discussion itself. So Let's start and put Karthik at center stage. Hi, Karthik. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Winston. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's exciting to be here.
No problem. Karthik, just let's start with the boardroom. In the last 18 months, the where of data has moved from a technical detail to a geopolitical risk. So, from your perspective, what are clients asking now that they never would have mentioned 2 years ago?
A great question, Winston. Yeah, so I was reading up somewhere recently, and it about in 2026, 70 countries are expected to have sovereignty laws. Yeah, 70 plus countries are expected to have. That's a big shift from where we were, say, 18, 24 months ago, right? Uh,
Mm,
in terms of where the data lives, I think the conversations have had a profound shift. Yeah. Yeah. If you go back 18, 24 months, it was primarily driven around operational efficiencies, what kind of cost optimization, how can we mine data, how can we use, say, a global cloud network, and say look at metrics like latency and things like that. But can we use Azure? Can we use GCP? Can we use AWS for faster analytics? Those are the questions. Today, it is pivoted or pivoting, if I should say. It is more around resilience and control. They are not looking at just from a clients and even internally as organizations, right? So I worked with global banks so far, and what we've been seeing of late is looking at it more as a where moving away from where we have stored it for compliance to looking at how the architectures can be, say, helping us, say, act as a firewall, yeah, against volatility. Um, so discussions were centered around GDPR earlier. Now we are looking at Cloud Act, US DOJ rules. If you're coming closer to home, so PIPL in China, DPDP Act in India. So yeah, there's a lot of conversations around essentially the compliance related aspects. One of the surveys that I was looking at is also was very, very eye-opening. Around about 90% of the industry leaders are looking at sovereignty risks today, given the geopolitical shifts,
mm,
and what does it mean from a reputational damage that can arise out of inadequate planning. So two key geopolitical risks that people are looking at, primarily driven around deglobalization trends. So what kind of, say, cross-border transfer regimes do we need to have? You used the term, I mean, and you were talking about it in your initial one, where you were saying there's a regulations change overnight. There is sudden shifts in policies. There was a nice term that I heard and might be good for us to use: sovereignty shockwaves. Yeah. Yeah, so that I think is one key geopolitical risk that we need to address. And
mm.
AI sovereignty is another key aspect that we need to keep in mind. It's no longer a productivity tool. Those were the conversations in 2024 and 2025, I would say. Now it is around, there is enough and more dependency that we've built on that AI tooling. So how do those for if it is for an AI models and infrastructure that we are using. So how does that access to the, say, LLMs that we are using, or say restrictions on training data? So that whole terminology around AI sovereignty is another key geopolitical risk, Winston. Yeah, yeah. It's become summary statement. I would say it has become more from a tactical to an existential question. Yeah, and we need to balance innovation and sovereignty. Till, say, in 2024, 2025, we are all going gunning for innovation. How do we use these tools, and how do we make our operating models much efficient for us, for our clients? Yeah, but yeah, a lot more
Thanks.
things are changing. Yeah.
Thanks, Karthik. And one thing I wanted to ask before I open it up to Matt is when you mentioned that the questions have changed, before, a lot of banks tend to always look for a gold standard when it comes to a compliance. Say, when it comes to privacy, it is GDPR. But when it comes to today's conversation on sovereignty, the nuances or the gaps or the differences between different regulations really matter. It can be actually quite a big difference. Do you see that conversation or the realization sort of seeping in that we have to really look at it very differently instead of just hoping for a gold standard?
Certainly, no two ways about it, and it all depends upon where the data originates, where the data is stored, where the data is used. All those three elements are very, very key, depending upon which regulatory environment that we are looking at, it changes. So compliance people have become all the more important.
That's always good. Matt, your views?
Well, let's think about how we got here because we're talking about timeframes and sovereignty kind of snuck up on us in some ways. We were watching the waves coming from afar and they have manifested into something that's quite powerful, I think. So what happened? Well, I think looking back at some of the early rumblings we saw probably emanated from Western Europe, probably France, legislation passed in Germany and Italy that was really concerned about the protection of consumer data and thinking about where information is hosted. And we started to see legislation being passed through European parliaments. This is probably sort of 2023, 2024-ish, which kind of lines up with what Karthik was saying about we're really focused on innovation at that point and not on the sovereignty side. And then, of course, but we started to distribute our data much more as well. I mean, we've got a cloud, we've got a core, we've got endpoint devices. I mean, the laptop that I'm working from right now, our mobile phones all have information and data disseminated across it, which in some ways may have of sovereignty concerns. And then there was the big change. Okay, there was an administration change in the United States. And I think we'll just put that down to being geopolitical concerns and geopolitical tensions. We've seen trade wars, we've seen tariffs, we've seen physical wars as well that have emanated across multiple geographies. And there is now a turning inward from many organizations and countries to say, hey, not only do we need to protect our trade routes, not only do we need to protect particular industries, but we need to protect the data and the information that is really fueling our societies. And so, forged in the crucible of these three forces, out pops data sovereignty. And, this is something that has been on customers' minds now, I think, well, on their radar at least for the last 6 months or more. It's something that I put in my predictions for late 2024 and into 2025, and we started to see that come up. And I think this year we'll see some maturation around where we are with the data sovereignty conversation. So certainly it has been very fast paced. And it intersects with many of the bigger themes that we're talking about today, things like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, distributed computing, etc. Irrespective, we find that there is a sovereignty angle associated with lots of it. So therefore, there's lots of conversations with customers now about how to be sovereign, what sovereign means. In the case of a banking organization, legislation and regulation changes, we could argue on a daily basis almost, Karthik. You need to really watch that. And what's different for people like Karthik and for the financial services community is that the regulations there have teeth. Sometimes regulation in particular industries can be a bit hand wavy, but we're talking about real fiduciary implications and penalties for breaching that. So, as Karthik said, what have we got? 70 new nations that have announced sovereignty legislation. The prediction from where I'm sitting is that this year we're going to see a wave more, and we're going to see further refinement of those 70 countries that have already passed legislation. So look for version 2 and version 3 of that to be passed by Parliament as we increment through the year. So this is a rapidly changing space. It's got a lot of attention, and I'll say one last thing, which is it is a uniquely international concern. And what I mean by that, because we've done our own research into this. As a former researcher, I'm fascinated by the topic. But in order for me to be able to get a really clear sample and indication of what was occurring in the marketplaces, I actually extracted North America altogether from the research. And the reason is that if you're talking to a American-based agency, a three-letter acronym agency, whichever one it might be, and they're going through a migration project, a cloud migration project, their choices are pretty much laid out for them. That's rather simple. You're going to go with one of the major hyperscalers, more than likely. Where are their data centers located? East Coast, West Coast for redundancy. Who are the people that are working on these systems? No doubt they've got security clearances, Yankee White, these types of things that enable them to work with sensitive information. So I think that there is something of a blinkered view coming out of California and from the United States about how impactful this is for us out in international markets. So just something to keep in mind.
Matt, I just wanted to ask something that Karthik pointed out. The burden falls on the compliance to usually that's where they take up a lot of these sovereignty issues. But from your conversations with a lot of customers, is that conversation spreading to different departments? Because it takes a few departments to actually solve a lot of these issues.
Maybe this is due to the scientific nature of my observation. That of course I'm going to look at particular parts of the organization first, but I don't see it coming from compliance first. I think compliance was tapped on the shoulder by IT. I think that IT has been driving, and the CIO's office has been driving a lot of the conversation around this, and of course the CDO function underneath it. My advice to them has been over the last 12 months, don't try and do this alone. This is not something that is solely the burden of an IT department. This needs to be done in collaboration. It needs to be done with board approval. It needs to have the CEO support, and you need to have functionally the appropriate parts of the organization focused on this. You need legal, you need compliance. You're going to need, arguably elements of HR and lines of business that are actively the customers, I suppose, of internal IT to also have conversations around where their information needs to be and what necessitates something that is critical for the business versus something that is just nice to have for the business. So this is one of those group efforts, and I'll frame it this way. I think that IT was first conscious of this, like we were during the pandemic. Okay, when we started to work from home, when businesses were closed, when we couldn't go out more than twos or whatever the rules were in your country, IT was looked to as being that Sherpa that really drove the connectivity and the continuation of business. And of course, they couldn't do that alone, but I think that the stock of IT really rose during that period. And so too now, the business is really looking to IT as well as being one of the answers to this. So I guess from my perspective, I don't see compliance really being the driver here. They're heavily influential, and I think they're acting as counsel for IT, which is great. But the digital nuance here of what goes where and how it all works, I think ultimately will sit in the CIO's office.
Karthik, you agree?
I completely agree. I like the particular aspect of the cross-functional team that Matt mentioned. No two ways that there'll be one single individual or a part of the business that can solve for this. And when it comes to, say, banking kind of organizations, so invariably the business, there are multiple businesses under the banking organization. So when it comes to, say, the part of the business that I'm part of, security services, fiduciary funds business, so the considerations are separate when it goes to, say, cash management, treasury, trade, and all those. So you do need a cross-functional team, no two ways about that. There is necessity around considering all of the elements, and there's no simple answer, I would think, Winston. Yeah, it's hard work.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do a bit more hard work by calling out the results of the poll survey. So we
Right,
can
let's have a look.
understand. Wow. Okay. There are two people who did not answer the question. That was the first thing that came out of my mind. But the question was, how would you describe your organization's current approach to data sovereignty? It looks like a tie. Some people have clearly defined strategies and approach, and some are in the mix of putting in some policies. Karthik, coming from inside a bank, is that correct? Do you see it resonate with what you see inside the bank?
I really can't comment specifically for Standard Chartered, but what
Sure.
I've observed from the industry is it is say one or two, yeah, in some sort of that space.
Mm.
Whether everything's been implemented is a question that I will have. Defined, maybe yes, but yeah, partially implemented is what I will stick in the second bracket. More votes. I was expecting that to have more votes than first, but yeah, I'm surprised one and two are there. Yeah.
Matt, do you see maturity here?
Well, I love analyzing on the fly. It's fun. Let's have a look here. So there's a group of people saying that they're across it, and that's good. I think this might also be industry specific. You know, for some industries like healthcare, government, financial services, there's probably added complexity where someone wouldn't have the goal to say, yeah, we've got it covered. But you know, if you're a more simple, straightforward type of manufacturer, for example, you know, maybe it's a more simple thing to be across. So, you know, I kind of get that. What's good to me is that we're in the process is lower, so you know it shows that the conversation is moving really quickly here. And despite the fact that I am technically a service provider, I guess on the supply side of the equation, um, you know, don't rely too much on your cloud and service providers. And if you do, my advice here is to really make sure they know what they're talking about, and that they're not trying to, I don't want to use the term put lipstick on a pig, but essentially say something about their product that may not necessarily be true, because we know that there are some things being labeled as sovereign, and then you pull back the covers and quickly discover that in fact there are tentacles of perhaps compliance that reach back into other countries. So I would offer caution and just make sure you do diligence there, for partnering with the right cloud or service provider.
Thanks, Matt. Keen insights. Thanks, guys. Now, I would like to go into two questions that are being asked on the audience Q&A. And thanks, Clarence and Yuki, for actually coming up with the questions. The same question which Yuki seconded. Basically, we are saying that there's a lot of juggling going on, especially around fragmented regulations, data localization rules, because a lot of the rules are not set, are in motion at the moment. And cross-border complexities keep on going. And then there is always legal entanglements with cloud providers. And of course, all this comes down to operational costs, which is another issue that banks have to deal with. So what practical strategies can financial institutions can use to overcome these challenges? Karthik, I'll pose that to you, but maybe you can look at it from your experience in working out this kind of strategies. What worked, what did not work?
We kind of touched on it briefly while we were looking at the survey, right?
Yeah.
I would say that it is kind of there's no easy answer here. Yeah, there's no one size fits all approach. What I would think, what I've observed rather, it works best is kind of a hybrid model where you harness, say, the global cloud efficiencies at the same time, say, protecting or fortifying yourself against the sovereignty risks. So what do I mean by that is, say, deciding what stays global, what stays, say, within the sovereign borders. Yeah, that requires a rigorous multi-layered review. Yeah. So typically what I've observed is that you start off with a comprehensive data mapping, data audit kind of a framework. You then overlay it with, say, the regulatory jurisdictional compliance requirement. You look at country-specific regulations, and you learn from some of it, as you said. So, say the acts are, the regulations are are also evolving, as if you can use that term, and then look at once you have the data audit, data mapping, then you look at what are the compliance frameworks that you look at it, risk assessments, review impact, what could be the potential downside of geopolitical volatility, what is the, say, if we can use the term workload jurisdiction, where does that happen? Is there requirements around, say, real-time fraud detection kind of, say, requirements there? You take that into consideration and overlay that with, say, business and operational efficiency. What are you kind of investing on, and what is the efficiency that is coming through? And with a cross-functional team that Matt really brought about earlier, and having, say, having a full governance around it will help. Yeah. It doesn't only stop with your internal models, it also extends to the vendor models, and you cannot just rely on a labeled solution these days. You do have to lift the hood, look at what are the underlying architectures. I mean, when we are, say, talking to our clients are essentially asking us for all of these questions as well. And when we are using vendors, we are asking all of these questions as well. So vendor management framework has undergone a significant change for broader organizations, larger organizations, which have a specific, say, vendor management teams and things like that. So they are also a party to the whole puzzle as well. Yeah. No easy answer, as I said, Winston, but yeah, I mean, these are the various tenets in which people are operating to kind of, say, arrive at that.
Yeah, but at least it's good. I mean, especially from the survey, we can see that people are actually talking about this rather than ignoring it.
I'm just wondering if we should open up the webinar to one of the people on, say, the top bracket and ask them for their views as well.
I'm sure it'll be coming through soon.
Type them in.
Karthik, I just wanted to just dig slightly deeper into what you just mentioned. How, people usually will have this idea about certain data sets needs to be locked down locally, and certain data sets can be shared in a global cloud environment. Has that changed, and what do people overlook? It's a very nuanced approach. So what do people overlook? What are the lessons you have learned on that side?
Yeah, great question. There are three things there. One is around PI, right? Personally identifiable data. That is something which is very, very critical. And again, depending upon the industries that you're looking at, for us in banking, that is like, say, a Bible. Yeah, I mean, we guard it so closely. Yeah, so there is a lot of sensitivity. So that elements is one thing that one misses out on, as to, say, what could be possibly classified as PI, what is not PI. And again, regulations, some of those countries have some much more detailed definitions of what is PI and what is not. So one needs to adopt, say, a union of all the regulations rather than an intersection of all the regulations. So that's one area. The second is around, it's not just the data nature, it's also the three elements, I would say: data collection, data processing, data utilization. So all of these elements need to be looked at when one sees, say, the sovereignty risks. Yeah. The common mistake that some of I've understood is you look at only one of this element around collection, and then you don't look at where you're processing the data or where you are, say, utilizing that output of that data. So it transcends all the three elements of sourcing, utilization, and processing as well. Yeah. So these are the two broad things I would say that I've seen as common pitfalls, if I can call those. Matt, I don't know if you have some thoughts, and yeah, your
Well, yeah,
experience is much wider. Yeah.
I've got a thought because earlier you said, "Oh, it's very complex. There's a lot of heavy lifting," and I'm glad you got this question from I think it was from Clarence, because it really shone a spotlight on exactly the amount of work that's required. I think the thing is that it can be manageable if we're looking at it from one or two countries, but when we're talking about this multi-jurisdictional world that we're caught up in, there is a lot of complex legislation that you need to keep up with. I mean, look at what's coming out of Indonesia versus what's coming out of Taiwan. Very strict when it comes to data controls. And you mentioned DPDP coming from India, etc., and this legislation is constantly changing. But that's just to look at a single dimension. Having said that, let me just insert another thought in here. I work with customers and I see the projects that are being deployed across all industries horizontally. I don't see anyone really doing a sovereignty project on its own. It still doesn't happen in isolation because the lift is so heavy and the return on the investment is so variable, if we can put it that way. It's a big cost. It's a heavy lift, and it forces some philosophical questions as well of the organization of how sovereign do we need to be? Where do we draw the line? What are we willing to cede sovereign control over? And I think all of the legislative moving parts that we're talking about and the jurisdictionality of data really depended upon what call is made by the board and by the CEO to say, look, this is the amount of risk that we want to build into our organization. This is the amount of innovation that we would like to keep. And this is where we're going to draw that line. Companies today, organizations today, I feel still haven't defined the line, if I can put it that way. And roughly, and I'm oversimplifying here, what does that look like? Well, think about how many small workloads, applications you've got inside your organization. If you're a larger organization, the number's going to be in the thousands, for sure. At what point, if you stack rank the seriousness and the importance and the impact and the customer data, etc., all of the dimensions for each one of these particular workloads, at what point are you willing to say this is something that we must have control over and it must be sovereign and always based in a data center and we own the assets underneath versus something that we're willing to cede control over? And I'll give you some basic examples of this. At Pure Storage, we've got a busy office and you need to book a meeting room. And we've got a SaaS service that does that for us. So we go online and we can find a meeting room and we can book that for an hour or whatever it means. Do we need sovereign control over that? Absolutely not. Does it give us competitive edge, flexibility, enabling a more of a frictionless experience in the office? Then yeah. So that's the sort of thing that you're going to have to decide. What point does it become too critical to cede that control over? And I think these are important conversations for everyone who's on this panel today to take back to, or in the audience today, to take back to your organizations, to ask the CIO or to bring up in a meeting and table, how much flexibility are we willing to maintain? And what do we want to give up control over? Knowing full well the amount of work that's required as Karthik laid out. Now, there's some other dimensions as well, but I think we'll push through Winston for the next topic.
No, there's one thing that Yuki was asking as a second question was what happens when we have to leverage hyperscalers and we word it in the contract for location of data. But what happens if the hyperscalers decided to change the hosting side without informing its customers? Karthik, let me put you on the spot on that. What happens in that kind of situation?
I was just about to say, maybe not my forte.
Okay.
Yeah, I really don't. It's more a technical, IT technical one. I would think I would really rely on my technology partners, and here I will rely on Matt essentially.
Well, it's a really good question, and there's a tendency, at least from my perspective, because I think about big, hairy-chested workloads that run, core banking and, critical, mission-critical applications. But there's this long tail of SaaS that exists in our organizations as well. And that's really challenging from a data perspective to understand what's being collected, and there's a lot of work associated with that. Contractually, though, it's far simpler when you're building out within particular geographies or domains, or you've got assets from the infrastructure organizations, and it's pretty straightforward. But contractually, if they're going to change that, then I would assume that your legal department has been working very closely with purchasing to ensure that there is an element within your contract that requires and necessitates the provider to flag that with you. If they don't exist within your existing contracts, then that's something that you would definitely want to be looking at when you come up to renewal time. I don't think that this is going to be an unusual request. I imagine that the SaaS organizations are starting to get this quite a lot, so it may end up being part of the boilerplate in time.
Okay. Thanks for that, Matt. Slightly going to a more fiduciary and funds kind of perspective for Karthik. For global funds, insurers, and asset owners, data location and control are now intertwined with fiduciary duty, cross-border fund administration, and outsourcing models. So is sovereign data becoming a new requirement for investment committees? Is the CDO now essentially a risk officer for the fund's reputation? Just wanted to see how that conversation is evolving.
Yeah, it's a great question, looking at it with a fund's lens. Yeah. What we are seeing is fund managers per se are still looking at starting to look at localized investment vehicles, sovereign first products, and those kind of conversations are kicking off. I wouldn't say it has really gone berserk as yet, Winston. Yeah, in terms of it's more the operational side of it where we are hearing more conversations around, say, if I host the fund's data, where am I hosting it? And if it is PI, again, how do I host it? How do I ensure sovereignty in that? We are looking at it market by market, essentially, when it comes to that, where again, going back to the same three principles of where data is collected, data is processed, and data is, say, used. Yeah. Some clients are looking at the contracts, drawing the necessary languages into that. Trustees, depositories, fiduciary agents are all looking at data resilience as a key risk, and how do the frameworks enable that. Say a few years back, the trustees were more looking at how the performance was being reviewed. How then came about, say, something like an ESG risk. Yeah. So how do you kind of, say, integrate it into the process? We are now moving into a domain where data resilience and data resilience risk is being reviewed as well, alongside the various other elements, of course. So, like as I was mentioning, say, the various parts of the bank are changing, various parts of the organization is changing. The fiduciary world is also changing to kind of look at this. From a fund product perspective, it is still some time away to look at, say, sovereign first products, very, very early days, and more so in a private equity kind of a space, not much of the traditional, say, funds investments world.
Okay, thanks. Matt, you got a observation on that?
No, because I'm on the outside looking in. We just heard Karthik, really laying out what's happening there. I think that's an eloquent response.
Okay. For your side, I wanted to get a bit more technical on the architecture. When we all have this idea that we the ultimate goal is to have an architecture that is truly unswitchable by a single government or entity. What does that look like? Or are we just over engineering this?
We're over engineering it until there's an outage, right? We're over engineering it until West Coast goes down and we realize that the coffee maker doesn't work because the phone home element of that will happen to be hosted in AWS. No, we're not over engineering. I think we're meeting the expectations of an always on economy, of an always on business, and the fact that there is really very little patience for downtime. So no, I guess the short answer to that is that we need to go to even greater lengths to ensure continuity. But what that looks like is changing. What that's looking like now is certainly adding a sovereign dimension to the purchasing criteria. And there is far more inspection of the providers as well by purchasing teams, by organizations to understand how sovereign a particular product may be. So one of the things that we've been suggesting to customers is to look for local sovereign providers, sovereign cloud providers within your particular jurisdiction, whether you're in Australia or Singapore or Japan, India, for example. There's a whole host of local businesses that are owned exclusively by individuals and companies from that particular jurisdiction. And then, of course, the physical assets, the data center, et cetera, is all within those particular borders. These are in really critical inspection points. What you don't want to find is that you have a US organization or a Chinese organization or foreign organization, I'll just say that, offering what is labeled as a sovereign service, but when you pull back the covers, really isn't. And what I mean by that is there are particular availability zones that a hyperscaler may have within Australia that is marketed as being sovereign because the data center actually sits in Australia. And so you think naturally then it's sovereign and it's protected. But what we know from a legislative perspective is that there is things like the US Cloud Act that has its tentacles into these facilities that enables three-letter acronym organizations from the US. So CIA, FBI, NSA, Department of Homeland Security, the list goes on, to be able to access that data through court orders, to be able to actually alter and tamper the information that's currently sitting in what you think is something under your sovereign control. So yeah, we're asking some valid questions around what the architectures look like and how much risk are we willing to take in our organization. If you're defense, if you're a large Big Four bank, in Australia or here in the region, there's particular assets that you just wouldn't be able to risk under that kind of architecture. So what we're seeing is a push towards investing in more infrastructure. But importantly, what's different today versus 10 years ago when we started moving to the cloud is that the tools exist in this new on-premises world that not only mimic but exceed the capabilities of what you can get from a hyperscaler anyway, and still provide the level of flexibility. Now, you don't want to be all on-prem, you don't want to be all in the cloud. You do want that hybrid approach. As I intimated earlier in one of my other responses as well, it's about understanding the stack of your infrastructure, not your infrastructure, your applications, and deciding and defining what should run where. Where is latency important? Where is security more important? Where is governance and compliance requiring you to keep information? And that will be the answer to this. So stepping back, what have we got? We've got an edge, we've got a cloud, we've got a core. And we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. We want to make sure that we have the capability to be able to maneuver information and place it in the right jurisdiction, in the right country, and ensure that the policies are met so that our data remains compliant. And as we move forward into this world of artificial intelligence and more utilization of information and data, this is only going to become more important.
Now, that's a good segue to a question from the audience. And I'd like to reframe that question. From Harshad, he's asking about cybersecurity risk emerging when AI systems make autonomous decisions in manufacturing. But I'd like to reframe it to data sovereignty risk, especially when many of these AI systems were trained, the model was trained at a time where data sovereignty laws were still coming out. And then they are making decisions at a time where the sovereignty laws might not be compatible with how it was trained. How are such risks looked at or considered? Maybe Matt, you can just look from your
Yeah,
perspective.
I'm going to try and anticipate what Hashad is trying to ask here, because what I think is being asked here is this is an evolution from that protection of that IT OT that we saw converge in manufacturing. So being able to ensure that your control systems had appropriate levels of security to keep the bad actors out. There's a couple of things I want to say here. Firstly, when it comes to AI, typically we're pooling information together. So we're seeing more data lakes, data warehouses, etc., to have centralized information. We want that data close to where that processing takes place. And what we've done is we've created honeypots. We do get bad actors in there, then that can be exploited, and obviously maliciously. From a manufacturing perspective, I would see this as being more of an issue from protection of nation state actors rather than from cyber gangs and criminal gangs. But suffice to say, what this is, just stepping back, it's a problem we've been dealing with for some time. Okay. Now we've just scaled it up. There are risks associated with it, but we do know that there's enormous amount of work and focus and investment taking place within cybersecurity at the moment to protect things like these AI honeypots that we're building.
Would it go even further? Because now we are not just looking at a AI system or even the cloud that it is running on. We have to also look at secondary services, sub-processors.
Yeah,
So how does
I'm less concerned about the AI element of this. I'm more concerned about how much autonomous control exists within manufacturing. Taking over fleets, being able to connect to driverless vehicles, these sort of things are more concerning to me. I think the AI tag less so, and the reason I say that is because I don't think that's necessarily how we're utilizing AI at the moment. Really, it's still more down the chatbot end of the spectrum, and I'm less worried about my chatbot taking over something than I am an OT control system being able to, change parameters on public transport or on a utility network. I think there was some news that came out recently that there were some buses that had been bought by the Denmark government that apparently could be controlled from a Chinese factory or from elements in China. So there were some serious questions now being raised about, how much level of security and scrutiny do we need within purchasing to ensure that these sort of things aren't posing a risk in future.
I think you got a viewpoint?
So from a banking financial services specific viewpoint is that the training bias, okay, is something that we are seeing as a regulatory requirement emanate from these evolving regs. So that's something that, I mean, to add on to what Matt already said, right? I don't want to be repeating, but yeah, that training bias with that synthetic data is something that is critical. Incremental point, multi-cloud, edge computing, say, are all are very similar to what Matt mentioned. Yeah. So the additional element I would say is the training bias that we need to be mindful of.
Right. We have around 5 minutes, so we are sort of coming down. Before I ask for your concluding thoughts, Jens, just wanted to ask about a future outlook. If as data sovereignty becomes a permanent fixture, how does the role of, in this case, first I asked Matt, how does the role of a technology provider change? how does it shift, especially when you're working with a customer? Is there going to be an exchange of knowledge? Is there going to be a team, sort of like a small red team, blue teams who are actually looking at certain stuff?
I like that question. You got me by surprise there, but we've given this some thought, and we've spoken to some customers. We've spoken to banks in the region. We've spoken to healthcare organizations that are also, grappling with the issues of sovereignty. And the path forward, from my perspective, is looking like co-creation. And this is where ourselves as a supplier, along with perhaps a GSI partner, or a systems integrator of some kind, as well as the customer, work during the course of the project from start to finish, to ensure that the customer's requirements and the telemetry is part of the build out for what the infrastructure or the platform and the supporting system should look like. So that's really how we're changing here. It is complex. We don't pretend to know anything, and I think anyone who does come out with statements like that, take it with a grain of salt. But unless you are very specifically and deeply embedded within a customer, and co-creating what the solution will look like, I feel that there is too much room for error. So this is a project that needs to be thought of with that old adage of measure twice, cut once. It is expensive, it is heavy lifting, and I will say one other thing as well, maybe one or two things, which is what a project will look like for sovereignty in 2026 isn't, as I was saying earlier, just being a sovereign only project. What I expect to see is it will be sovereignty plus, or plus sovereignty. So we're going to do a cloud migration program plus sovereignty. We're going to do application modernization with a sovereignty band. We're going to think about performance. We're going to think about whatever it might be that you're doing to improve your systems, the way that you deliver digital and IT services to your constituents, to your customers, to your internal customers, whatever it may be, will start to have a sovereignty angle cast through it. That's what we're keeping in mind, and that's how we're educating the marketplace and the CIOs about what is the pragmatic and practical path forward to solving this challenge.
I think, what about yourself in your role? How is it going to change in 5 years with all this sovereignty headaches?
First, I need to start understanding technology a lot better. Jokes aside, yeah, I think it's becoming front and center. I see it more front and center. It is the way we approach it today. Typically, any business, when it comes to, say, when you roll out a program, when you are in a project, then you consider what is sovereignty elements that you need to bring in. I think as we move forward, we will have the reverse happening as to how do you have sovereignty at the center and create the full operating model around it, yeah, and how can you enable that, and through the process, of course, have your technology come in and help you through all of those key questions. Use AI efficiently, and responsibly is another key thematic as well, just to add on to that.
I think, just a quick question. When you mention about putting sovereignty in the center and building the operating model around it, from your perspective, does that mean you need different types of expertise? Do we have the right talents today, or we need to upskill, retrain those talents to think that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the cross-functional aspect comes in. I don't think we have teams who understand all of this today. Yeah, it will be not a single person as well. Yeah, so it'll be somebody who is strong on compliance, somebody who's strong on the business, somebody who understands tech better. So all of these same three forces coming together, and that's where I see the role of CDOs and CIOs, as Matt mentioned, being very, very critical in terms of being the driving centrifugal force to kind of say draw all of these people's intelligence and then build it around that. Yeah, not an easy one.
It's never easy. That's the message we're going to have after the discussion. Matt, maybe I'll put you on the spot. 2 to 3 takeaways from today's discussion.
Takeaways. Well, I think my first piece of advice to everybody is to go back to your organizations today, or if you're already there, take your headset off and spin around in the chair and ask a colleague whether they're across this. If they're working on anything that's sovereign by design, and what the sovereign future is. So the reality is that this is a fast-paced, changing environment. Expect more regulation coming through this year. Expect constant updates to that. So there's a lot of complexity. But this is your opportunity also to be a custodian of change, to be a leader and a change agent for something that's going to be visibly very important within your organization. So there's an opportunity for those of you that are attending today. If you've got the competence and the confidence and you can navigate this path forward, then be that lighthouse, be that North Star for your organization and take it through, because I think IT has a really critical role to play here. And I'll leave it at that, Winston.
Thank you, Matt. Karthik, do you want to add anything? Last thoughts?
Yeah, just a business lens to it, right, Winston? The way I look at it is we work with clients and ourselves. There's a lot of influence that we can do on the regulatory environment. So do the advocacy the right way, try and bring the best practices to countries. You learn from one, you teach the another. Yeah, so bring the best practices, global best practices to all markets. That will be my mantra for 2026 when I look at this space. Yeah.
Thank you, Karthik. And with that mantra, we are coming to the end. Thank you for the audience as well for all the questions. It was actually injected a lot of insights and thoughts into our discussion, which I actually liked. And also a call out to the chat. You will see a link to a position paper from Pure Storage as well. Please do, if you're curious enough, please do download it and have a look at it.
I just want to jump in, Winston. This is true academic research. We partnered with the University of Technology, Sydney. It's not vendor-sponsored research, and we worked with a team of academics and looked into a bunch of countries, excluding the US, as I say. So really interesting. I do recommend you click on that link.
Thank you. And we have a feedback form. How did we do? We do want to understand from your perspective areas that we could have improved, areas that we did well. That will help us to actually shape the next conversations that we're going to have during on this series. So please do scan the QR code, fill out the surveys. Trust it will be just less than 30 seconds, and it will be very valuable input from us. While you do that, on behalf of Pure Storage, Standard Chartered, who have joined us for this conversation, and on behalf of CDOTrends, thank you. Have a good rest of the week, and hope to see you again in the next Thought Leadership series.